Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are tackling the source material you sent, Chapter 40 of Harper's Illustrated Biochemistry, and diving right into the incredibly dynamic world of biological membranes. Our mission is to really understand what might be the greatest architectural feat in all of biology. The cell boundary. I mean, why dedicate a whole deep dive to a simple skin?
Well, because it's not a simple skin.
Yeah.
Not at all. It's not a static wall.
Right.
It's this hyperdynamic, self-regulating structure. Think of it as the essential selective city limits for every single cell in your body. It manages everything coming in, everything going out, and every signal.
And that boundary is really defined by a core structure, right?
Yes, the lipid bilayer. It's
Yeah.
a double layer of lipids, and it's densely woven with associated proteins and glycoproteins. This whole structure gives us three functions that life just can't do without.
Okay, what are they?
First, selective permeability, letting some things in but not others. Second, compartmentation, creating all those specialized organelles like the mitochondria. And third, transmembrane signaling.
So we're going on a journey today from the tiniest molecules that cause this structure to the dramatic effects we see in human health. And the stakes are huge.
They are. If this boundary system fails, the consequences are severe. You get major clinical conditions like cystic fibrosis, which is a failed chloride channel.
Or something like familial hypercholesterolemia, which is a defect in how things get into the cell.
Exactly. And to really get it, you have to understand the environment the membrane is managing. Our body water, which is about 60% of lean mass, is split
Into two domains.
two key domains. 2/3 of it is the intercellular fluid, the ICF. That's the specialized internal environment where the cell does its work.
Repair, energy production, all that.
Right. The other third is the extracellular fluid, the ECF. That's the delivery and waste removal system for the whole body.
And the membrane is in a constant battle to keep those two worlds totally different, chemically speaking. The data in the source is striking.
It's a radical contrast.
Inside the cell, in the ICF, you're loaded with potassium and magnesium. Outside, in the ECF, it's all sodium and chloride.
And the membrane's whole job is to maintain that huge difference, that steep gradient. It's the basis for, well, almost all cellular communication and energy.
So let's start with the architecture itself. The structure explains the function.
It really does. And you can see that function dictates structure just by looking at the ratio of protein to lipid. It varies wildly.
Frickin' myelin.
Myelin, which is basically just electrical insulation for nerves, has a very low protein ratio. But then you look at the inner mitochondrial membrane.
A metabolic powerhouse.
A total powerhouse handling massive amounts of transport. Its protein to lipid ratio is super high, about 3.2.
But the foundation for all of it all comes back to the lipids. The source material points to three major classes, and they all share this amphipathic nature.
Yes, that's the key term. Amphipathic, it just means they have incompatible solubilities.
A split personality.
A split personality is a great way to put it. They have a hydrophilic head that loves water and a hydrophobic tail that absolutely hates it.
And that incompatibility is what drives everything.
It's the thermodynamic driver of life. Because those tails shun water, they force the molecules to self-assemble. They either form little spheres called micelles, or, and this is the crucial one for cells, the bimolecular lipid bilayer.
So if phospholipids are the basic bricks, what are the other two types do? You've got glycosphingolipids or GSLs.
Right, they're built on a ceramide backbone. And what's special about them is their sugar components always face outward, sort of like the cell's identification tags.
And then there's cholesterol, the most common sterol in animal membranes. But interestingly, not in plants.
Cholesterol is so important, but let's talk about flexibility for a second.
Yeah.
The membrane has to be fluid.
It can't be rigid.
It can't be. If the fatty acid tails are all saturated, they're straight, and they pack together really tightly, that makes it rigid.
But most lipids have an unsaturated fatty acid.
They do, in what's called the cis configuration, and this creates a sharp kink in the tail.
Like a bend in a straw.
Exactly like that. And these kinks are like molecular speed bumps. They prevent that tight packing, which directly leads to the membrane fluidity that life requires.
And this explains why that core of the bilayer is such a fantastic barrier. It's greasy. It was hydrophobic.
Completely. That's why small nonpolar gases like O2 and CO2 or lipid-soluble drugs, they can just slip right through. But for the polar things a cell needs, like electrolytes,
Sodium chloride.
sodium-potassium chloride, for those things, the core is virtually impermeable. They get stopped at the door.
So if the lipid core is this fluid sea, then the proteins are the floating icebergs. This is the fluid mosaic model.
That's it. And we can categorize the proteins by how they interact with that C.
First, you have the integral proteins. These are the icebergs. They interact a lot with that hydrophobic core, and they often span the entire bilayer.
They do, usually as a bundle of what we call alpha helical transmembrane segments. You need a stretch of about 20 specific amino acids just to cross the membrane once.
Then you have the support staff, the peripheral proteins.
I like that. They're not icebergs, they're more like hangers-on. They're loosely bound to the surface.
Like anchorin and spectrin in red blood cells.
A perfect example. They don't span the membrane, they form a meshwork just underneath it, and that meshwork is what maintains that classic biconcave shape of the red blood cell.
And the fluid part of the model isn't just a theory. We can see it. Lipids and proteins are constantly moving around.
Rapid lateral diffusion. But that brings up a question. If everything is just drifting, what holds the cell together? And that's where cholesterol becomes the unsung hero, the fluidity buffer.
How does it buffer it?
It's clever. Its function changes with the temperature. Below the membrane's transition temperature, when things are getting stiff, cholesterol gets in the way of the lipids packing too tightly, which actually increases fluidity.
It loosens things up.
But above that temperature, when things are getting too soupy, its own rigid structure limits all that disorder. It prevents the membrane from becoming too liquid.
So it's a molecular thermostat, keeping it just right.
Perfectly put. Now, the last piece of the structure is that it's not symmetrical. It's highly asymmetric.
Meaning the inside and outside are different.
Very different. For instance, all the carbohydrates are only ever found facing outward. Even the two lipid layers, the leaflets, are different. The outer one has mostly choline-containing lipids.
And the inner one?
The inner one has the aminophospholipids. And this difference is maintained because the movement between layers, what we call the flip-flop, is extremely slow.
And this asymmetry allows for specialized areas, these microdomains.
Exactly, like lipid rafts.
Yeah.
These are small, highly ordered regions that are rich in cholesterol, certain lipids, and key signaling proteins.
The idea being that you concentrate all the players for a specific signal in one spot to make it more efficient.
That's the hypothesis. And related to these are caveolae, these little flask-shaped indentations containing a protein called caveolin-1, often involved in bringing things into the cell.
Okay, let's unpack this and move to the second act.
Yeah.
If that hydrophobic core is the city's perfect impermeable wall, how do we get essential supplies past it?
Now we get to the sophisticated security gates, the transport systems.
How do we classify them?
We can split movement in two ways. First is passive transport. This is movement downhill from high concentration to low, and it requires zero energy.
That includes simple diffusion, like for oxygen gas.
And facilitated diffusion, which needs a specific transport protein to help a molecule get across the barrier.
And the opposite is?
The opposite is active transport. This is moving things uphill against their gradient, and this always requires energy, usually from ATP hydrolysis.
Let's talk about the facilitated transporters. They're fascinating because they act more like enzymes than simple pores.
They really do. They show specificity, so they only recognize one type of cargo. And crucially, they are saturable.
What does that mean, satural?
It means they have a maximum speed, a Vmax. Once they hit that capacity, adding more cargo doesn't make them go any faster. It's like a turnstile at a train station. There's an absolute limit to how many people can get through per minute.
And how do they physically work?
They use what's called the ping-pong mechanism. The carrier protein literally changes its shape, its conformation, to bind the solute on one side and then release it on the other.
And this can be regulated.
Critically so. Hormones are a major regulator. Insulin, for example, tells the cell to rapidly move GLUT glucose transporters to the surface. This immediately increases the Vmax for glucose uptake.
Now for active transport, this is where we see the real cost of life, isn't it?
It really is. Maintaining these chemical gradients is so vital that it consumes a staggering amount of power. Something like 30% of a cell's total energy budget is just for running these active pumps.
30%? That's incredible.
It is. And we can group these pumps into four major classes. There are P-type, F-type, V-type, and the ABC transporters.
ABC for ATP binding cassette.
Right. And that last family is extremely important clinically. It includes the CFTR protein.
Which, when mutated, causes cystic fibrosis.
That's the one. But the real star of the show, the definitive P-type pump, is the Na plus K plus ATPase.
The sodium-potassium pump. This one enzyme is essential for every nerve impulse, every muscle contraction.
And almost all secondary transport. Its mechanism is just beautiful, it's precise, and it's mathematically balanced.
What's its exchange rate?
For every single ATP molecule it burns, it pumps 3 sodium ions OUT of the cell
Reap.
and brings only 2 potassium ions IN.
So there's a net loss of positive charge from the inside.
Exactly. 3 positive charges go out, only 2 come in. This creates a charge imbalance across the membrane, making the inside more negative. We call this effect electrogenic.
It's a tiny battery. It's literally building a voltage into the membrane.
That's a perfect analogy, and it's so critical that many drugs target it. Cardiac drugs like uabane and digitalis work by inhibiting this very pump.
Okay, so transporters are slow and pumps use energy. What about just fast lanes?
That's where ion channels come in. These are specialized proteins that form selective pores. They're lightning fast.
Much faster than a transporter.
Dramatically faster.
Yeah.
They allow specific ions, sodium, potassium, calcium chloride, to just flood across when they're open.
But they aren't always open. They're gated.
They're gated, exactly. They only open transiently. And the gates are controlled by different things. Sometimes a ligand, like a neurotransmitter, sometimes a change in voltage, or even a mechanical stimulus like pressure.
The precision here is just, it's hard to grasp.
It's mind-blowing. Take the potassium channel. It has what's called a selectivity filter. It's only about 12 angstroms long, and it's lined with carbonyl oxygen atoms.
And this filter is like a bouncer at a club.
A very picky bouncer. A potassium ion is just the right size to shed its water and interact perfectly with those oxygens. But a sodium ion, which is actually smaller, gets rejected.
Why? If it's smaller, shouldn't it fit?
It's too small to make the right energetic connections with all the oxygens at once, so it gets kicked out. It's an amazing level of precision.
And the voltage-gated channels, how do they work?
The mechanics are incredible. They have a voltage sensor that acts like a charged paddle. When the voltage across the membrane changes, that paddle physically moves through the membrane.
And that movement opens the gate.
It's mechanically linked to the internal gate, so it physically pulls it open or pushes it shut, a purely mechanical voltage-driven switch.
And we even have dedicated channels just for water.
Aquaporins. They allow for rapid water flow, but they also do something else vital. They exclude protons. They break the hydrogen-bonded chain of water molecules that protons usually use to relay themselves through.
And if these break?
Mutations in the aquaporin 2 channel can cause a condition called nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, where the kidneys can't properly reabsorb water.
So this machinery all works together. It's not in isolation. A great example is how we absorb glucose from our intestines.
A critical example of primary and secondary active transport cooperating. It's a 3-step process.
Okay, step 1.
Step 1. The now plus DOX-K plus DOX-ATPase pump uses ATP to create that low internal sodium gradient. That's primary active transport.
It's building the power source.
Exactly. Step 2. Glucose enters the cell, actually against its own concentration gradient, by hitching a ride with sodium through a Na plus glucose importer.
So it's using the energy from the sodium gradient that the first pump built.
That's secondary active transport. Perfect.
So now the glucose is trapped inside the cell at a high concentration. Well, step 3.
Step 3. All that glucose now flows down its own gradient, exiting the other side of the cell into the bloodstream through a GLUT2 uniport, which is a form of facilitated diffusion.
That's a beautiful coordinated system.
It is. And this coordination is the basis for one of the most important medical treatments in global health: oral rehydration therapy, or ORT.
Right, for diseases like cholera.
Exactly. When a patient is severely dehydrated, you give them a solution with both salt, NaCl, and glucose. You're deliberately exploiting that Na plus DOX glucose symport.
Because ingesting both forces the symporter to pull both sodium and glucose into the intestinal cell.
Which creates a massive osmotic gradient. And that gradient forces the desperately needed water from the gut into the body, directly fighting the dehydration. It saves millions of lives, all by leveraging this one membrane mechanism.
So that's small molecules. What about bulk cargo? Large stuff.
That's endocytosis. The cell literally ingests segments of its own plasma membrane by forming a vesicle.
And there are different types.
There's phagocytosis, which is cell eating for very large particles, mostly done by specialized cells like macrophages. But all cells do pinocytosis, cell drinking.
And that's split into 2 types as well.
Right, fluid phase, which is just non-selective sampling of the outside fluid, versus the much more efficient absorptive or receptor-mediated endocytosis.
This is the selective one. It uses high-affinity receptors that are concentrated in special areas called coated pits.
Which are lined with a protein called clathrin. The classic textbook example is how the LDL receptor pulls cholesterol into the cell,
But there's a dark side to this.
a very dangerous one. Many viruses, hepatitis, polio, HIV, have evolved to hijack this very efficient pathway to get inside cells and start an infection.
And the reverse process, releasing things from the cell, is exocytosis.
Correct. Purposeful release of macromolecules like hormones.
Finally, we have structures for cells to talk directly to their neighbors.
We do. Gap junctions are direct channels. They're formed by connexin proteins, and they create a pore that connects two adjacent cells. They let small molecules, up to about 1,200 Daltons, pass freely between them.
Which allows for instant coordination, like in heart muscle.
That's a key example. And then there's the new frontier of this kind of communication, extracellular vesicles.
The exosomes and microvesicles.
Exactly. These are tiny vesicles that bud off from one cell and travel to another. They're not just cellular dust. What's fascinating is their payload.
What's inside?
They're delivering complex cargo proteins, DNA, messenger RNA, other bioactive molecules are like little molecular envelopes, a whole new system of communication that we're just beginning to understand.
Okay, so for you, the learner, let's recap the most important takeaways from this deep dive. Number 1.
The structure is dynamic. The fluid mosaic model, defined by those amphipathic lipids and the floating proteins, is the essential physical principle of life.
Takeaway number 2. A cell's life depends entirely on highly regulated transport. You have to understand the difference between passive movement through channels and transporters.
And the massive energy investment required by active pumps, especially the Na plus managed K plus AT pace. Remember, it uses about a third of the cell's total energy just to maintain that imbalance, that non-equilibrium.
And number 3. Clinical correlations bring it all home. The structure-function link is everything.
It is. A single point mutation in a transport protein like the CFTR protein can lead to a devastating disease like cystic fibrosis. It proves that this membrane is the absolute foundation of human health.
So what does this all mean? The membrane isn't just an accident. It's a living, dynamic machine. It burns massive amounts of energy to selectively manage the very differences that define life itself. And that brings us to a final provocative thought for you to explore. Considering the diverse, information-rich payload of exosomes, we're talking proteins, DNA, mRNA, and their proven ability to target specific cells and deliver that cargo, how does this newly revealed system of extracellular vesicles fundamentally change how we must think about the transmission of disease, especially in complex processes like cancer metastasis? Think about it. What are the implications of a cell intentionally packaging and mailing instructions to its neighbors?